Let's welcome our guest of today, David Peck.
Hi.
That was you, in case you were wondering.
Yeah, there's no need to introduce A to B or introduce B to A, so we just have David Peck.
How are you?
We are good. How are you?
I'm okay.
So David, we're going to talk about some of your past experience as a theater director. But before we get to that, we want to talk about something that is far more important, and that is the fact that you used to be a taxi driver. because our listeners here in Beijing and all around China, this is what is on the tip of their tongue. This is the biting social issue of the day.
Is that the first taxi driver? Well, it used to be taxi driver we're having here on the
I think
show?
David Peck is the first taxi driver on the show.
You can't be sure of that because a lot of taxi drivers won't tell you that they had been taxi drivers.
So the first
You may have
taxi
had some
driver who would
stealth
admit it.
taxi
Maybe
drivers.
he is the sixth one.
Could be.
Could be. So David, where were you a taxi driver?
Oh, well, I was a taxi driver in 2 towns. One for only
You got
one.
kicked out of the first one?
No, I got kicked out of the second one. I was a taxi driver for about 6 months in Bridgeport, Connecticut, which is
Is that like a New York suburb or almost?
yeah, it is. It's actually the second largest city in Connecticut, but nobody's ever heard of it. But I was there for about 6 months, and that was really interesting. And then I was in New Haven, Connecticut, which is where Yale University is. But just for one night because I got another job right after that. And I was kind of sad because I really loved driving a taxi, and I was looking forward to driving in New Haven, but the job went away.
Why do you want to be a taxi driver at that time?
Because I needed to make money and I could drive.
And there were no other requirements.
That's it, yeah.
Language ability doesn't matter.
And I love to do jobs where you deal with people a lot. I really enjoyed that. So it was a good job.
Then how do you think of the Beijing taxi drivers compared to the...
There are taxi drivers and there are taxi drivers.
They are.
Some are wonderful and some of them, not as wonderful.
That's very polite.
We are.
But in general, my experience with Beijing taxi drivers has actually been pretty good. The cars sometimes are not in great shape.
Why is this?
Well, the other night,
Even the mix of color are not very...
over the weekend, I think I took a taxi. I wasn't sure I was going to make it all the way home because the taxi was having a little trouble. But that's unusual.
I was in a taxi once that broke down, and you know where I was in this taxi that broke down? I was in Afghanistan. In the middle of nowhere. We were concerned.
And thereby hangs a tale.
Yeah. So anyway, you're a taxi driver in Bridgeport, Connecticut,
right.
A suburb right outside of New York for 6 months.
Well, it's about an hour from New York.
Hour outside. And you do that for 6 months. You go to New Haven, Connecticut, because you could only last there for a day. Tell us about your most interesting taxi driver story.
Oh, goodness. Taxi drivers have lots of interesting stories. I probably the ones that I know one. I was driving around one night, and a guy who was somewhat 3 sheets to the wind, which in American idiom means he'd been drinking a little too much.
You got to use that one on the next show.
3
sheets to the wind.
Okay,
Yeah.
we'll
Our
write
English
it
teaching
down.
show will write it down.
Picked me up, or I picked him up, I should say, and said he wanted.
And apparently you were 2 sheets.
Who got drunk? That's a question.
I picked him up, and he said he wanted to go to Leominster, Massachusetts, which was about 3 hours away.
Wow.
And so I went and picked up my girlfriend at the time, who later became my wife. I said, "Do you mind if I take somebody along?" And I picked her up, and then we just had a nice merry drive. And he paid me. I said, "Well, I'll take you, but you have to pay me before I go," because he was
a lot of money.
A lot of money. And we settled on $100 for the trip. This was a long time ago. It would be much more than that now. And I drove him up there, and he slept most of the way, and we had a nice drive. And I got him to approximately where he wanted to go. He wasn't quite sure. And he got out of the car and then tried to give me another $100. He thought he hadn't paid me yet, So. But I turned it down, and then my fiance and I had a nice drive back home. But that was a nice evening. And in the middle of that drive, we stopped on a friend out of the blue and in Massachusetts, and I convinced him that I had bought the taxi and now owned the company. And
How long it takes for that trip?
about 3 hours each way.
3 hours?
So it was my whole night. I worked the night shift starting around 6, and I got back in time to get off the next morning.
If you were in China, do you think a taxi driver would take that, to take the mask?
I think a taxi will take you almost any place you'll pay him to take you.
Wow, 3 hours That's almost like Beijing to
That's
Tianjin.
a lot of money, yeah.
3 hours the way.
Well, it's less than Beijing. I mean, it's more than Beijing to Tianjin.
Tianjin is
a
maybe
lot more.
Beijing to
Some other place that's 3 hours away. Yeah.
Shandong, Qingdao, maybe. So which means enjoy the trip yourself with your
that's
fiancé.
fine. You know, once you start driving, and I love to drive. I really like to drive.
Oh, what's the fun?
I like to drive so much that I even drive in Beijing. So.
But
so I'm making a note. David is a masochist.